Well, hello everyone, and welcome as I knock things over because I am not the most graceful person going. Yeah, so today I want to talk a little bit about underpainting or no underpainting, and does it actually make a difference? So normally, when I do any kind of portrait study that is not going to be any kind of serious piece of work or anything like that, it's more of a practice round for me. I'm usually working on a very thirsty white canvas, usually a cheap canvas, nothing like spectacular or anything, but it's mainly to get the practice in of mixing color and seeing how things look on a canvas. Sometimes prior to actually making a larger piece is that I want to figure out kind of a color scheme, and it also gives me a good practice with my portraits. Kind of like I did with the Geralt of Rivia painting or the Wednesday painting. Just a white canvas in one sitting, alla prima, wet on wet style. However, I recently was doing a tutorial on Patreon on how to create realistic skin tones using a limited palette, and I decided to conduct an experiment because I wanted to see if there was actually a huge difference between doing a value underpainting versus not. And the only way that I would be able to figure this out was by doing two paintings from the same reference photo. Basically two of the same paintings, just one with an underpainting and one without an underpainting. And what I found was actually really interesting. So let's get into this. All right, so here we have my normal setup for when I'm doing a quick portrait study. I have my palette on the right where I am, in this case, using 4 colors plus titanium white, a limited palette in order to create all of my skin tones. I have my 8x10 canvas, which is just a plain white canvas, and I have my drawing already on it, and I have my reference photo on the left, which I've printed out on photo paper so that I can make a comparison between the colors that I mix and the reference photo. So you'll see me often take my brush over to the reference photo and make a comparison of the color that I've mixed to the color that I see in the reference photo. And this is a really good way of kind of gauging what the value of your color is. The difficult thing about painting on a white canvas is that it's actually really difficult for you to discern the value of color that you're putting on the canvas. And one of the reasons that, in my experience, that I find this is that I have a harder time seeing the value in color than I do in grayscale. But this is a really good practice for me because it helps train my eye to see value in color. So, I mean, I don't think that it's a bad idea to try just painting straight onto a white canvas, don't get me wrong. However, it is actually a really good practice for you to try and learn how to see the value in color. But white is actually more challenging to paint on than if you had like a neutral gray value painted over the top of your canvas, and then you can see what your lightest lights are and your darkest darks are. If you have sort of a mid-tone color on your canvas already established, it actually makes painting the values a lot easier when it comes to color. However, like I said, I'm not knocking this way. I do this all the time when I'm doing portrait studies. And it's not a bad method of doing things. And it actually is really quick because you're not putting the extra work in on, having to put a layer of paint underneath it or doing any kind of value study underneath it. However, when I paint my larger pieces, I almost always do a value underpainting because it actually makes the painting process a lot quicker with oils when I move on to that part of things. And I usually do a value underpainting with acrylics so that it will dry faster, because if I did it with oils, I'd be waiting days before I can actually paint over it in oils. So doing an acrylic underpainting that has a value scale to it is actually the way that I do it when I do larger paintings. And I paint on black canvases a lot, so this actually really helps me to do it in acrylics because I can do layers in order to bring that color or that value up to a much lighter value. And then when I go onto oils, I already have it all mapped out for me. So as you can see, if you look very closely, you'll see a discrepancy in the color of the reference photo versus the colors on this particular portrait painting. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was working on a white canvas, and it actually is going to be a little bit on the rougher side as far as the finished product goes. It's one layer of paint, there are no layers, it was a wet on wet kind of experiment, and there you have it. So that is how I do a normal portrait study, which is just doing one straight layer of oil paint. So for this one, what I wanted to do is first get a neutral value onto the canvas and paint it all over the canvas with acrylic paint. And as you can see, I tried to match it with the actual palette paper. So we've got a neutral gray that I'm just going to paint all over the canvas before putting my sketch onto the canvas. So once I have my sketch established on my canvas, I then make a value scale. And I'm using a wet palette and acrylics here, but I basically mixed ultramarine blue and burnt umber together in order to create that value scale, because I find that with those two colors mixed together, you get a pretty good neutral value scale, and it works really well. So this is a pretty quick process because I'm not concerning myself with detail. The main objective is to create a foundation in grayscale by blocking on the values as I see them in the reference. In other words, I'm creating a value map which will then help me to see the value of color once I move on to the oil layer. The only issue I have with doing a value underpainting in acrylics is, well, acrylics tend to dry a value darker than when you first apply them. However, as long as I can see where my lightest values, darkest values, and midtones are, it's still extremely helpful despite the inaccuracies. Not only that, but the rough image is already established on the canvas, and any corrections can easily be made, whether it's proportional or anything like that, before moving on to oils. On a side note, you notice I don't have any black on my palette. That's because my base is a mixture of burnt umber and ultramarine blue, which makes a pretty dark color that can pass for black. This is the combination I also use in oils for the background. One of the greatest benefits of doing an acrylic underpainting is the speed at which it dries. I can quickly get a base value on the canvas, and within minutes I can start sketching and painting the next layer. If I were to do this process completely in oils, it would take days. So moving on to oil paint, I'm using a limited palette of titanium white, ultramarine blue, quinacridone red, cadmium yellow, and burnt umber. This is the same palette that I used for the first painting. Okay. So let's discuss my first observations of painting atop the underpainting versus no underpainting. Did I say disgust? I'm not disgusted. All right. Number one, the way the paint moves. All right, so clearly this isn't my first rodeo when it comes to using an underpainting, but I've never done two portraits in the same day using two completely different methods. And because of this, I've never really taken the time to observe and appreciate how oil paint moves on the surface of a thirsty canvas versus a canvas that already has two layers of dry paint established on it. This was sort of intriguing to me because the surface had been made even smoother with the application of acrylic paint, thus making the oil paint spread like room temperature butter compared to the rough, naked canvas in which the oil paint was more like butter in an air-conditioned room. So that was my first observation. My second observation was how much easier it was for me to find the color value because of the grayscale map. There was none of the second guessing that I often face when trying to find the correct value of color on a white background, which brings me to my third observation. This took less time. Because of the grayscale underpainting, the oil painting process actually went a lot quicker. In fact, the whole entire painting from start to finish, even with doing the two layers, one being a background layer of a neutral gray color and then a grayscale painting, and the oil painting on top of it, actually took less time than the original painting process that I did with just oil paint. Why? Well, I didn't have to spend as much time value correcting my colors. All I had to do was compare my color mixes to the reference, plant my brushstrokes, and it looked correct. The darkest colors didn't appear too dark because the value immediately next to it wasn't white. And even though the acrylic underpainting dried slightly darker in value, it didn't matter because I had a map of where the value shifts were. In addition to this, I felt that my color mixes were more accurate and also more vibrant. This is probably due to less corrections being made during the painting process in the first painting and the overmixing of paint. That can sometimes occur when your accuracy is off. Overall, I feel that this experiment was a pretty eye-opening one, not only because of the observations made during the painting process, but also in the outcome of both pieces, which we will get to. It was also nice to paint with a limited palette again because it made me practice my color mixing skills and test myself on my accuracy. Sometimes I can get distracted by the vast array of colors out there and forget the value of going back to basics and utilizing a more minimalistic approach to painting. I mean, really, all the times that I've gone somewhere and traveled and was like, oh, I wish that I had brought some of my paints, but there's no way that I could pack all of those paints. How soon we forget the beauty of a limited palette and how easy it is to pack 4 colors plus titanium white. Oh, Lydia, you extravagant mortal, always wanting your material goods with you. You want 50 colors of paint, and you want to travel with them and create a masterpiece, but all you need is 4, plus titanium white, and you'll be all set. I never have to worry about packing too many pairs of shoes, just too many tubes of paint. Everyone has their issues, okay? Anyway, I digress. This video isn't about a limited palette. It's about an underpainting versus no underpainting. I got off topic there for a second, but it was related, so, just give me that. All right, so once this painting is done, we're going to make a quick comparison of the first painting with no underpainting and the second painting with an underpainting. I just said painting way too many times. So here is the second painting with the underpainting completed, and you see how smooth it is, how buttery it is. Now let's compare it to the first painting. So as you can see, the second painting is far smoother, but not only that, but the values are far more accurate compared to the first painting. In addition to this, doing the grayscale underpainting gave me the opportunity to correct any proportional errors before moving on to oil paint, so the proportions are actually a little bit off in the first painting compared to the second one. Well, everyone, thank you for watching. I hope you found some useful information in here. I hope you found the experiment to be kind of interesting, because I actually was really surprised at how big a difference it made with the outcome of the paintings. So if I were to say underpainting or no underpainting, I would definitely say underpainting. And that is my final assessment on this. It's not going to stop me from doing alla prima portrait studies that are really quick and really easy and just laying paint on a canvas, but it does really kind of drive it home about how vital an underpainting can be for the outcome of my paintings personally. I can't speak for anyone else, but definitely having a value underpainting is extremely helpful. All right, so I will see you in the next video. I hope you all have a wonderful day and see you next time. Bye.